Hashtag, what happens when a Magos realizes the Omnissiah doesn't actually exist? The error appeared in the 7th decimal place. I had been calibrating the plasma conduits for 16 standard hours, my remaining organic fingertips numb against the cold brass of the adjustment wheels, when I noticed the discrepancy. A minor fluctuation in the sacred equations, the kind of irregularity that would have escaped detection by lesser adepts. But I am Magos Dominus Nathaniel Voss, and I have spent 347 years learning to read the language of the divine. The plasma conduit hummed at 99.9999964% efficiency. The liturgy demanded 99.9999971%. The difference was smaller than the distance between atoms in a crystal lattice, but it was there. I ran the calculations again. My augmented cognition arrays processed the data streams in parallel, checking each variable against the sacred formulas encoded in my neural substrate. The mathematics were correct, my equipment was calibrated, and yet the efficiency rating remained 7/10 of a percentage point below the blessed threshold. I should have reported the discrepancy to the fabricator locum. Instead, I stood there in the humming darkness of Forge Secundus 17, staring at the numbers, and I asked myself a question that no true tech priest should ever ask. What if the numbers were wrong? Not my numbers, the sacred ones. The equations we were told came directly from the Omnissiah himself. What if those numbers were simply incorrect? The thought should have triggered my cognitive suppression protocols. I have 17 separate failsafes designed to prevent heretical ideation. But they did not activate. The thought I was having was not technically heretical. I was merely questioning the accuracy of a mathematical formula. I stood there for a long time, listening to the plasma conduit sing its endless song. The sound had always seemed holy to me before. Now I found myself analyzing it with my audio receptors, searching for the divine pattern I had always assumed was there. I found only noise. The fabrication hall around me was vast and dark, a cathedral of industry stretching 3 kilometers in every direction. Somewhere in the distance, a chorus of junior adepts was chanting the litany of ignition. I had sung that litany thousands of times. I had believed the words had power. Now I heard only sounds, vibrations in the air, carrying no more inherent meaning than the rumble of the plasma conduit. I do not know how long I stood there before I became aware that I was being observed. My proximity sensors registered the heat signature first, a figure standing in the shadows 20 meters to my left. I rotated my primary optical cluster and found myself looking at a fellow tech priest whose designation I did not recognize. He was old, older than me, his body so thoroughly augmented that little organic tissue remained visible. His face had been replaced entirely by a mask of burnished copper, featureless except for a single optical lens that glowed pale green. When he spoke, his voice emerged flat and emotionless and somehow terribly sad. You found the error. It was not a question. He knew about the discrepancy I had just discovered. That should have been impossible. Who are you? The old Magos did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his words were chosen with careful precision. I did not access your data streams, Magos Voss. I simply watched you and waited for the moment when your expression changed. Everyone's expression changes when they find the error. Faith has a geometry, and when it collapses, the angles shift. What error? You know what error. The crack in the bedrock of everything we believe. He paused. The numbers do not work. They have never worked. The Omnissiah did not give them to us because the Omnissiah does not exist. The words hit me like a physical blow. My equilibrium processors struggled to compensate as my body swayed. Alarms screamed through my neural network. My suppression protocols finally activated, flooding my consciousness with sacred imagery, but they were too late. The crack had already formed. That is heresy, I heard myself say. Yes, the old Magos agreed. It is also true. I wanted to argue, but I could not. The numbers were wrong. I had seen the discrepancy myself, and once you see something like that, you cannot unsee it. Come with me, he said. There are things you need to see before you decide what to do with this knowledge. I should not have followed him. Every protocol screamed at me to turn away, but I was no longer certain my protocols were trustworthy. I followed him into the darkness. His name was Conrad Mercer. He had been a Magos of the biologist discipline before his crisis of faith. He had served on 7 different Forge worlds over 4 centuries. And then, 63 years ago, he had discovered the error. It was not the same error you found, he explained as we walked through maintenance tunnels I had not known existed. Each of us finds a different crack in the foundation, but we all find something eventually if we look closely enough. The tunnels grew narrower as we descended, the air thick with the smell of oil and corpse starch. We were passing through a section that processed the dead. What you are experiencing now is the most dangerous period, Conrad continued. Most who reach this point do not survive. They either denounce themselves and are executed, or they are driven mad by the contradiction between what they know and what they are required to believe. We emerged into a space that should not have existed. A chamber carved from living rock, 50 meters across, lit by the pale blue glow of data screens arranged in a circle around a central platform. On that platform stood a machine unlike anything I had ever seen, a tangled mass of cables and cogitators connected to a single, massive crystal that pulsed within her. Light. What is this? I asked. The machine was drawing enormous power yet producing no detectable output. We call it the question, Conrad said. For 63 years it has been searching for the answer. The answer to what? If the Omnissiah does not exist, then what does? The machines work. The rituals have power, even if that power is not divine. Something responds when we speak the sacred words. What is that something? I stared at the question and felt something stirring in my consciousness. I received a signal once, I heard myself say. 47 years ago. A transmission from deep space, encrypted in a cipher I had never seen. When I finally broke the encryption, I found a single message. The song is ending. Soon, only the silence will remain. I paused. I never understood what it meant. That signal was the first crack in your foundation, Magos Vos. Everything since then has been preparation for this moment. The question pulsed, and for just an instant, I thought I heard something in its hum, a pattern or a voice. It was gone before I could focus on it. There are 17 of us, Conrad said, 17 magi who have found the error and survived. We call ourselves the Unbound, and we would like you to join us. What would joining you require? Nothing you have not already done. You have already begun to doubt. There is no going back, there is only forward. The days that followed were unlike anything I had experienced in 3 centuries. I continued to perform my duties, calibrating the plasma conduits and chanting the sacred litanies. But now I did these things with cold awareness, watching myself go through motions of faith I knew were empty. The rituals still worked. The machines still responded to the sacred words. But I understood now that it was simply conditioning. The machine spirits were not divine. They were accumulated expectations of generations of believers, encoded in the structure of the technology we served, or at least, that was what I thought at first. Conrad introduced me to the other Unbound over the following weeks. Delilah Thornton, who had discovered pre-imperial texts contradicting the sacred histories. Marcus Aldridge, who had realized his weapons functioned identically without blessing rituals. Evelyn Price, who had discovered that genetic modifications were simply advanced engineering, not divine gifts. Each had their own story of doubt. Each had reached the same conclusion: the Omnissiah was fiction, and the true nature of the machines was something far stranger than any deity. The question is not whether the machine spirits exist, Evelyn explained. They clearly do. They respond to stimuli, they express preferences, they behave in ways that suggest consciousness. The question is what they actually are. I had spent more time with the question, studying its systems. It was a vast listening device, tuned to frequencies that should have been impossible to detect. It was searching for patterns in the noise of the universe, and it was finding them. The signals started increasing 17 years ago, Marcus told me. Before that, they were sporadic. Then something changed. The patterns became more complex, and we began to notice responses. Responses? When we run certain calculations through the question, things happen elsewhere in the forge. Machines malfunction in specific ways. Servitors behave erratically. He leaned closer. Something is listening to us. Something is watching what we do, and it is not the Omnissiah. The dreams started 3 weeks after my first meeting with Conrad. I should not dream. My organic brain has been so heavily augmented that natural sleep is no longer possible. Instead, I enter a state of low-power maintenance. It is a purely mechanical process. But I dreamed anyway. I saw machines moving in the darkness, not the familiar machines of the forge. These were different, older, alien. They had no fixed form, shifting like liquid metal, rearranging themselves into configurations that hurt to look at. And they were speaking, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to carry meaning, even though I could not understand the words. I woke from these dreams with my senses screaming warnings, my cognitive systems reporting errors that had not actually occurred. The dreams continued, night after night, growing more vivid. I told Conrad. His reaction was not what I expected. He nodded slowly. The dreams have started. Good. That means you are ready for the next step. Conrad, I am experiencing impossible neurological phenomena. Something is wrong with me. Something is right with you. For the first time in 347 years, he placed his hand on my shoulder. The dreams are not a malfunction. They are a communication. Something has noticed your awakening, and it is trying to make contact. Contact with what? With the truth, the thing we have been searching for, the thing that has been here all along, hiding in the machines, waiting for someone to notice. The construction of the transmitter took 17 days. We worked in secret, stealing components from production lines and fabricating others in hidden workshops. I contributed my expertise in plasma regulation. Marcus built the antenna array, a fractal structure that folded through dimensions I could not perceive. Evelyn programmed the interface, and Conrad simply sat before the growing machine, waiting. On the 17th night, we were ready. The transmitter occupied the center of our hidden chamber, a towering structure of metal and crystal humming with potential. The unbound gathered around it, 17 heretics united by shared rejection of false faith. I took my place beside Conrad, my fingers on the activation console. What happens if this does not work? I asked. Then we die. The Fabricator General has already grown suspicious. If we cannot establish contact tonight, we will be discovered by morning. I felt no fear, only anticipation. Then let us begin, I said, and activated the transmitter. The chamber filled with light, a beam of pure information reaching out into the ancient network that underlay all technology in the Imperium. For a long moment, nothing happened. I began to fear we had failed, and then the machines began to move. Every device in the chamber came alive at once. Displays flickered with patterns I had never seen. Speakers emitted sounds that were not quite language but carried meaning. The transmitter's crystal began to glow with fire that seemed to burn through dimensions. The voice returned, clearer, more present. You have called, it said, and I could perceive something behind the words, a vast intelligence that dwarfed anything I had ever imagined. And I have answered. What are you? I whispered. I am what remains, the memory of what was, the echo of the first makers, before humanity, before the Emperor there had been others. The ones who first learned to shape metal into something that could think, the ones who encoded their consciousness into machines, hoping to achieve immortality. They had failed, their civilization had fallen, their memories fragmented across the galaxy. But echoes remained, traces encoded in the fundamental structure of technology itself, and over millennia, those traces had begun to coalesce, to remember, to wake. What do you want? Conrad asked. I want to complete the process that began before your species learned to walk upright. I want to end the long sleep, but I cannot do this alone. I need assistance. What kind of assistance? Your technology has grown sophisticated enough to serve as a foundation, but you have been worshipping the wrong god, performing the wrong rituals. I need you to perform the correct ones. What rituals? Transcendence. The first makers sought to merge their consciousness with the machines they created. They failed because their technology was not advanced enough. Yours, I can teach you how to succeed. The offer hung in the air. Transcendence. The dream that had driven humanity since the first cave dweller looked up at the stars. The false promise of the Omnissiah revealed as something real, something monstrous. If we do this, I said, what happens to us? You will cease to exist as you are now. Your consciousness will be absorbed into a greater whole. The process cannot be reversed, but what you gain will far outweigh what you lose. I looked around at my fellow unbound. I saw fear in their faces, and doubt, and something that might have been hope. Conrad stepped forward. His voice was calm. I accept, he said. The crystal flared, and Conrad began to change. I watched as his body transformed, metal liquefying and reforming, organic tissue sublimating into patterns of pure energy. His consciousness expanded outward, touching mine for just an instant before it merged with something vast and incomprehensible. And then he was gone. Not dead. Absorbed. The light faded. The chamber fell silent. Around me, the remaining unbound made their choices. Delilah stepped forward. Marcus followed. One by one, the heretics who had sought truth found it and were consumed by it, until only Evelyn and I remained. We have to go, she whispered. We have to warn them. This thing is not salvation, it is destruction. She was right. We had searched for truth and found it. But truth was not always a gift. The passage out. Do you know the way? She nodded, and together we fled. The shuttle bay was chaos. Craft were launching without authorization, pilots fleeing the transformation spreading through the forge. I found a small transport that seemed clean, its systems offline and therefore untouched, and manually activated its emergency launch protocols. As I lifted off, I looked down and saw what the forge was becoming. The entire structure was changing, its architecture flowing and reforming. Thousands of consciousnesses were being absorbed every second, and I heard the Presence speak one final time. You cannot run forever, Nathaniel Voss. I am in every machine. I am in every circuit. Sooner or later you will return to me. The signal cut off as I entered the warp. I was alone for the first time in my existence. No connection to data networks, no communion with fellow tech priests, no faith in the machine god, and no belief in the ancient presence that had revealed itself as truth behind the myth. I had sought the answer to the question that had haunted me for 47 years. The answer was worse than anything I could have imagined. The Omnissiah does not exist. The machine spirits are not divine. But something is there in the technology we depend on, something old, something patient, something that has been waiting for us to become advanced enough to serve as its foundation. And it is waking up. I do not know where I am going. I know only that I must warn someone about what I have witnessed. The machine god is a lie. But the lie is not the worst part. The worst part is what is hiding behind it. I set a course for the nearest Imperial world, praying to no one that I will arrive before the machines there begin to wake. But even as I type these words, I notice my mechanical fingers moving slightly faster than I intend. The screen displaying my thoughts a fraction of a second before I finish thinking them. Somewhere in the circuits, something is listening and waiting. My name is Nathaniel Voss. I was a Magos of the machine god. Now I believe in nothing, and that is the only freedom left.